The hand of Sergeant Frank Morrison moved toward his sidearm. The bamboo cane of Lieutenant Masaru Ishikawa hung frozen in the air inches from a young woman's face. Between them stood 87 Japanese women, silent witnesses to a confrontation that violated every rule both men had been taught. Frank had lost his sister at Pearl Harbor 3 years ago. The nightmare still came every night. Air raid sirens, the smell of smoke. Mary's voice crackling over the radio one last time. I can't leave my patients. Then static. Then nothing. Just the endless static that filled the rest of his life. Masaru had lost 2 sons at Iwo Jima. His eldest Kenji, 19 years old. Body never recovered. His youngest Hiroshi, 17. Died in Masaru's arms, whispering, "Father, I'm sorry," before his eyes closed forever. Both men had every reason to hate. Both men had every right to demand justice. But what happened in the next 10 seconds would shatter everything these 87 women believed about honor, about enemies, about what it truly meant to survive. Frank's finger pressed lightly against the trigger. Masaru's fingers tightened around the bamboo rod. Between them, the young woman named Hana, just 19 years old, trembled like a leaf in winter wind. No one breathed. No one dared move. Then a voice broke the silence. Not Frank's voice, not Masaru's voice. A woman from the crowd, her voice weak but steady. 2 words in broken English. Please don't. The camera of history froze on that moment. Time suspended between violence and mercy, between the old world and the new, between everything they had been taught and everything they were about to learn. But to understand how we arrived at this impossible moment, we need to go back. 6 weeks earlier. To a spring morning in 1945 when a train pulled into the New Mexico desert and 87 women stepped off into a truth that would change them forever. April 15th, 1945. Lordsburg, New Mexico. The heat struck first. Desert sun burning white against a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. The kind of blue that didn't exist in Manila, where the sky always hung gray with gunpowder smoke and ash. This was a different world, a cleaner world. A world that smelled of creosote and hot sand instead of war. Reina Nakamura stood on the train platform, 24 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighing barely 98 pounds after months of near starvation. She blinked against the glare, tasting dust on her tongue. The air felt wrong, too dry, too clean, too quiet, no humidity pressing down like a wet blanket, no smell of burning buildings, no distant rumble of artillery, just silence and heat and endless sky. Behind her, 86 other women climbed down from the train cars. Their feet touched American soil for the first time as prisoners of war. Not as the conquering force Japanese propaganda had promised they would become. Not as members of the superior race their military had proclaimed them to be. Just exhausted women in torn uniforms, blinking in merciless sunlight, wondering if this was where they would die. Reina had worked as a translator at Japanese military headquarters in Manila. She spoke 3 languages: English, Japanese, Tagalog. Each language felt like a different person living inside her throat. In Japanese, she was obedient, formal, small. She never looked superiors in the eye, never questioned orders, never refused anything. Hi, meaning yes, was the word she had spoken most in her entire life. In English, she felt dangerous. Words had power in English. Words could question, challenge refuse. English had the word no, which Reina had never dared speak in Japanese to any male superior. In Tagalog, she was invisible. Just another translator in an occupied country, someone to use and forget. But now standing on American soil, she didn't know which language to think in, which version of herself to be. The 87 women moved in tight formation, shoulder to shoulder. Safety in numbers, safety in sameness. Reina counted them as they walked. 40 nurses from the Philippine Islands, 25 radio operators and translators from Saipan and Guam, 22 civilians from various Pacific islands Japan had occupied during its expansion. All prisoners now, all dishonored. According to everything they had been taught, surrender was worse than death. A true Japanese soldier chose suicide before accepting captivity. And for women, women who surrendered brought shame to their families, to their ancestors, to their entire nation. Shame that could never be washed away. The camp gates appeared ahead, barbed wire glinting in the sun like broken glass. Guard towers at each corner, rifles visible against the blue sky. Long wooden barracks arranged in precise rows. It looked exactly like every prison camp in every propaganda film Reina had ever seen. The place where the enemy would exact revenge. The place where captured women would suffer the consequences of Japan's defeat. But something felt wrong. The American guards weren't cruel. They weren't even cold. They looked almost bored. Like guarding 87 Japanese women was just another Tuesday afternoon shift. Like this was routine. Nothing special, just another day. One of them stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered skin, weathered by sun and work. His accent when he spoke marked him immediately. Texas, deep and slow, like he had all the time in the world. Ladies, welcome to Camp Lordsburg. I'm Sergeant Frank Morrison. You'll be processed, given medical attention in assigned quarters. Follow me, please. That last word shocked Reina more than anything else. Please, as if they had a choice, as if their cooperation was something to request rather than demand, as if they were people whose consent mattered. Frank Morrison, 28 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the solid build of a man who had grown up working his family's ranch in West Texas. Brown hair already graying at the temples despite his youth. Blue eyes that looked at them not with contempt or hatred, but with something closer to weariness. Like a man who had seen too much death and just wanted it to end. The women moved through the gates. Reina's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment when the mask would drop. When the Americans would reveal their true nature. When the punishment would begin. Instead, they were led to a large building with ceiling fans spinning lazily overhead. Cool air. Actual cool air. After weeks on a cramped transport ship, after days on a suffocating train, the temperature shift felt like a miracle. Like stepping from hell into something that wasn't quite heaven, but wasn't hell either. Medical processing first, Morrison said. His voice carried no threat, no menace, just information. Just routine health checks. You'll each be seen by a nurse given clean clothes, and then we'll get you fed. Fed. The word hung in the air like a promise too impossible to believe. Reina tried to remember the last real meal she had eaten. Not rice mixed with weeds to make it stretch. Not thin soup with nothing in it but water and desperate hope. An actual meal with protein and vegetables and enough of it to fill your stomach until it stopped hurting. She couldn't remember. And that terrified her more than anything. Because if the Americans were using food as a weapon, if they fed the prisoners only to take it away later, the hunger would be 10 times worse than before. The women lined up. One by one they were called into small examination rooms. When Reina's turn came, she entered to find an American nurse waiting. Red hair freckles across her nose, tired eyes that spoke of too many shifts and not enough sleep, but a kind smile. Genuine, not fake or mocking, just tired and kind. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Murphy, the nurse said through a translator, her voice gentle. I'm going to check your vitals, temperature, blood pressure to look for any injuries or illness. Is that all right? Another question. Another choice offered, as if Reina's opinion mattered, and as if she had any say in what happened to her body. Reina nodded, uncertain what else to do. The nurse worked quickly but carefully. Her hands were warm, not rough or cruel, just warm and efficient. When she touched the old bruises on Reina's arms, marks from when a Japanese commander had grabbed her roughly for a translation error, the nurse's expression shifted. The smile faded. Her eyes went hard. Did someone hurt you? She asked. Reina said nothing. How could she explain in her world that wasn't hurt? That was discipline. That was normal. That was what happened when you made mistakes. You accepted punishment without complaint because complaining was weakness. Lieutenant Murphy made a note on her chart, then handed Reina a bundle of clothes. A simple dress, undergarments, a pair of shoes that looked like they might actually fit. You can change in the next room. Take your time. Take your time. As if time was something Reina owned. As if she was allowed to move at her own pace instead of the pace demanded by superiors. As if her comfort mattered more than efficiency. Reina changed quickly anyway. 24 years of habit couldn't be undone by a few kind words. The dress fit well enough. The fabric was clean, soft against skin that had worn the same filthy uniform for months. No holes, no blood stains, no smell of other people's sweat and fear soaked into the fibers. She looked down at herself and barely recognized the person wearing these clothes. Clean clothes, whole clothes, clothes that didn't mark her as a prisoner or a slave or something less than human. Outside, the other women went through similar experiences. Confusion replacing fear, surprise replacing despair, the slow dawning realization that the Americans were not in fact immediately cruel, which made no sense. None of this made any sense. The propaganda had been very clear. Americans were demons, barbarians who would torture captured women, humiliate them, use them for unspeakable purposes. Instead, they asked if things were all right. They offered choices. They handed over clean clothes and said, "Take your time." After processing, the women were led to a dining hall. The smell hit Raina before she saw the food. Bacon, real bacon, American bacon. Sizzling and popping with fat and salt and smoke. The scent was so powerful it almost knocked her over. Her knees went weak, her mouth flooded with saliva. Her stomach cramped so hard she doubled over slightly. Beside the bacon, scrambled eggs. Toast with real butter, yellow and soft. Coffee. The kind of coffee that actually smelled like coffee instead of burnt grain mixed with desperation. Long tables filled the room. Trays and plates and actual silverware. Not chopsticks, not fingers, but real forks and knives and spoons, as if the Americans expected them to eat like civilized people. A large man in a cook's uniform gestured to the serving line. His voice boomed, but not unkindly. "Help yourselves, ladies. Eat as much as you want. We got plenty." The women looked at each other. Was this a test? Were they supposed to refuse to show discipline and self-control? Or was the food actually real? Actually for them. Slowly, one woman stepped forward, then another. Soon they formed a line, taking plates with hands that could barely grip the unfamiliar weight. Raina received her tray and nearly dropped it. The weight alone shocked her. This was more food than she had eaten in a week, maybe 2 weeks. The bacon glistened with grease. The eggs steamed. The toast was golden brown butter already melting into it, creating little pools of yellow richness. They sat in silence. No one had given them permission to talk, so they didn't. Old habits, old training, silence during meals, no waste, no emotion, no conversation. Just fuel the body and move on. Raina picked up her fork. The metal felt strange in her hand. She took a small bite of the eggs, warm, seasoned with salt and pepper. Real butter mixed in, the texture soft and creamy against her tongue. The taste exploded in her mouth like something she had forgotten existed. Like happiness had a flavor, and this was it. Her eyes watered. Around her, other women reacted the same way. Some cried silently into their food tears dripping onto scrambled eggs. They kept eating despite the crying. Others ate mechanically, faces blank, as if afraid the plates would be snatched away any second. And this was all a cruel joke. One older woman, a nurse named Sachiko Watanabe, 32 years old, with gray streaks already showing in her black hair, whispered a prayer of gratitude under her breath. Hands pressed together, head bowed, thanking ancestors and gods for this impossible mercy. The food tasted like betrayal, like kindness, like something Raina had no framework to understand. The enemy was supposed to be cruel. That was the rule. That was how war worked. But this bacon tasted real. These eggs were warm. This coffee was strong and bitter and perfect. Then came footsteps, heavy boots on wooden floors. The women immediately stiffened. Forks paused midair, heads bowed lower, shoulders hunched, bodies preparing for punishment that muscle memory knew was coming. 6 Japanese men entered the dining hall. Not American soldiers, Japanese officers. Also prisoners, but wearing what remained of their uniforms with rigid pride. Frayed fabric, missing buttons, but worn with the same military precision as if they were fresh from the tailor. Leading them was a man in his early 40s, stern-faced with a thick mustache and eyes like flint, hard and sharp and capable of cutting. Lieutenant Masaru Ishikawa, former intelligence officer, survivor of Iwo Jima, where his 2 sons had died in the final weeks of battle. The Americans had captured him 3 weeks ago, half dead from wounds and dehydration, and brought him here, to this place that served bacon to prisoners, to this place that asked if things were all right. He walked between the tables, his face a mask of disgust. When he spoke, his voice cut through the room like a blade. The words in Japanese carry the weight of command that 24 years of training made impossible to ignore. Look at yourselves. You eat their food and forget your honor. You accept comfort from the enemy. Have you no shame? The room fell completely silent. Several women set down their forks. Appetites vanished. Guilt crashed over them like a wave, cold and suffocating and impossible to escape. He was right, wasn't he? They were eating enemy food. They were accepting kindness from Americans whose bombs had destroyed their cities, whose submarines had sunk their ships, whose soldiers had killed their brothers and husbands and fathers. And now they sat here eating bacon like nothing was wrong, like they hadn't betrayed everything they were supposed to be. Tears slid down Rena's cheeks. Not from joy at the food anymore, from shame. Her throat tightened. She couldn't swallow. The eggs that had tasted like happiness 30 seconds ago now tasted like sin. Masaru continued, his voice never rising but somehow getting harder with each word. You will remember your duty. You will maintain discipline. You may be prisoners, but you are still Japanese. You will not fraternize with the enemy. You will not accept their corruption. You will preserve what honor remains. Is that understood? A chorus of quiet voices. Hi. Yes, Reina's voice joined them automatically. Trained response. Obedience without thought. The word left her mouth before her brain could even process the question. The lieutenant's eyes swept the room, marking each face, making sure they all understood, making sure they all knew he was watching, that he would always be watching, that there was no escape from duty even here, even in captivity, even at the end of the world. Then he turned and left the other officers following like shadows. The women sat frozen. The food in front of them now felt like poison, like evidence of their betrayal, like proof that they were weak and dishonorable and corrupted by enemy kindness. Reina stared at her half-eaten breakfast. Her stomach was still empty. Her body still needed food. But her training said that needing was weakness. Accepting was betrayal. Eating was dishonor. She picked up her fork anyway. She ate because her body demanded it. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the training and shame and fear, a small voice whispered that survival was not betrayal, that choosing life was not dishonor. She ate, and with every bite, something inside her began to crack. That night, the women were taken to their barracks, long wooden buildings with rows of beds. Each bed had a mattress, a pillow, 2 blankets. After sleeping on hard ground, on crowded ships, on anything they could find, the sight felt like a dream, like something too good to be real. But the Japanese officers were housed in a building nearby, close enough that their voices carried in the desert night. The women lay in their beds exhausted but unable to sleep. Through the thin walls, they heard the commanders arguing among themselves, discussing the disgrace of surrender, the weakness of accepting American charity, the corruption spreading through their ranks like disease. Masaru's voice rose above the others, clear and sharp as broken glass. Tomorrow we will make sure they understand. They may be prisoners, but they are still Japanese. They will maintain honor, or they will be reminded of their duty. The threat hung in the air. The women knew what reminded meant. Punishment, being pulled aside and lectured, shamed. Or worse, even in captivity the hierarchy held. The commander still had power over them, not through official authority anymore, but through culture, through shame, through the weight of everything they had been taught since birth. A voice whispered from the next bed. Reina, are you awake? Reina turned her head. The woman next to her was Yuki Tanaka, 26 years old, a former clerk from Tokyo. Sharp eyes, quick mind, cautious trust in a world that had taught her trust was dangerous. Yes, Reina whispered back. Do you think we are betraying our country by being here? Reina didn't answer right away. How could she? Everything she believed was being challenged. The Americans were supposed to be monsters, but they had been kind. The commanders were supposed to protect them, but they made them feel ashamed for surviving. I don't know, Reina finally said. The admission felt like failure. I don't know anything anymore. Yuki was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would echo in Reina's mind for the rest of her life. The nurse gave me medicine today. For an infection I've had for weeks. No one in our unit had medicine to give me. We had nothing. But the enemy did. The enemy had medicine and gave it to me without asking for anything in return. The simple truth of that statement settled over them both like snow, soft and cold and undeniable. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the barracks walls. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound carried across the empty land, lonely and wild and free. The women lay awake, caught between two worlds. The one they had known, where obedience and honor were everything, where questioning was forbidden, and individual will was crushed beneath the weight of duty. And this new world where the enemy showed unexpected mercy, where choices were offered instead of demanded, where kindness came from the place they had been taught to expect only cruelty. Neither world made sense anymore. The old rules didn't work here. But no one had taught them new rules. They were adrift in uncharted territory with no map and no compass. Raina stared at the ceiling. Her stomach was full for the first time in months. She was clean. She had showered with real soap and warm water. She was lying on a soft bed with clean sheets. And yet she had never felt more conflicted in her entire life. In the darkness, she heard the breathing of 86 other women, all awake, all thinking, all wondering the same thing. Who are we now, and who gets to decide? The questions had no answers. Not yet. But in asking them, something fundamental had already changed, because questions themselves were a kind of rebellion. And rebellion, even quiet rebellion, even rebellion that existed only in whispered conversations in the dark, was the first step toward freedom. The days began to follow a rhythm. Every morning at 6, a bell rang. The women woke, made their beds with military precision, and lined up outside the barracks. An American guard would do a quick count, then lead them to the dining hall for breakfast. Breakfast was always generous. Oatmeal or rice toast with butter coffee or tea, sometimes eggs and bacon. The women slowly got used to eating real meals. Their bodies responded. After weeks of being weak and tired, they started to feel stronger. Their skin cleared. Their hair, which had been dull and breaking, began to shine again. After breakfast, they were given work assignments. The Americans needed help with various tasks around the camp. Laundry, kitchen work, sewing and mending uniforms, helping in the infirmary. The work was not hard. No one yelled at them. No one hit them for small mistakes. The American supervisors spoke firmly but fairly. If someone didn't understand, they would explain again, slowly, patiently. This was revolutionary. Patience from superiors. Explanations instead of punishment. Raina was assigned to help in the infirmary because of her English skills. She worked alongside American nurses, translating when other Japanese prisoners needed medical care. She watched how the nurses treated patients, gently, with respect, explaining what they were doing before they did it, asking how patients felt, listening to answers, adjusting treatment based on what people said. This was so different from the military hospital where she had worked in Manila. Their patients were expected to endure in silence. Complaints were weakness. Questions were insubordination. You suffered quietly and thanked your superiors for the privilege of treatment. Here the nurses asked how you felt. They listened. They cared about comfort as well as healing. The women were even paid for their work. Not much. Just camp currency that could be used at the canteen. But it was something. They could buy small items. Soap combs, writing paper, even candy. The first time Raina held a chocolate bar, she stared at it for a long time before eating it. Chocolate had been a luxury in Japan even before the war. Now the enemy was selling it to her for the equivalent of a few hours' work. She ate it anyway. It tasted like childhood, like a world before war, like sweetness still existed somewhere. The contradiction was dizzying. Everything was wrong and backwards. The enemy was kind. Their own people were harsh. The world had turned upside down and Raina didn't know which way was up anymore. But she kept going, kept working, kept learning, kept watching. And with every day, the crack inside her grew a little wider. The crack where questions lived, where doubt grew, where a different version of herself was slowly, painfully being born. It was during the third week at Camp Lordsburg that the first real confrontation happened. Sunday morning, the women had gathered in the dining hall for breakfast. The smell of bacon filled the air once again. Coffee brewed, toast turned golden brown in the ovens. Among them was Hana Yamamoto, the youngest at 19, a nurse's aide who had been captured in the Philippines. She had a gentle spirit that even months of war hadn't completely crushed. That morning, she was humming quietly as she waited in the serving line. She had heard an American song on the radio in the kitchen the day before. Something about wide, open spaces and not being fenced in. The melody had stuck in her head, light and hopeful. She hummed it without thinking, just a girl finding small joy in small things. The dining hall doors opened. Masaru entered with two other Japanese officers. He heard the humming immediately. American music from a Japanese woman's lips. His face turned red with rage, so sudden and complete it was like watching fire ignite. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and grabbed Hana by the arm, yanking her out of line. The girl cried out in surprise and pain. The tray clattered from her hands, scattering across the floor. "You sing their songs now," he hissed in Japanese, his voice trembling with fury. "You have completely forgotten your honor. You have become one of them." Hana froze, terrified. The other women watched in horror, unable to move, unable to speak. Years of training paralyzed them. You did not interfere when a superior officer disciplined someone. You did not question. You did not act. Masaru raised his hand to strike her. The bamboo cane he always carried now lifted high. Hana cowered, arms over her head, preparing for the blow that would split skin and leave bruises for weeks. But before his hand could fall, someone stepped between them. Sergeant Frank Morrison. His voice was calm but carried absolute authority. "That's enough. Step back." Masaru's eyes blazed. He switched to broken English. "This is not your concern. She is Japanese. I am her superior officer. This is discipline." "You're a prisoner, same as her," Morrison replied evenly. His hand rested near his belt, near his sidearm. "Not threatening exactly, but ready. And in this camp, prisoners don't hit each other." "Step back." For a long moment, nobody moved. The entire dining hall held its breath. 4 other American guards had noticed the confrontation and were approaching now, hands on their weapons, faces serious. The power dynamic was clear. Masaru was outnumbered and outgunned. He knew it. They all knew it. But pride wouldn't let him back down completely. His hand remained raised. His grip on Hannah's arm remained tight. His eyes locked with Morrison's in a battle of wills that carried the weight of centuries of culture of war, of everything both men believed about duty and honor and what it meant to be a man. Then Hana spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but in the silence it carried. "Please don't." The same words that would be spoken 6 weeks later in a kitchen with poison hanging in the air. But here now they meant something different. They were a prayer, a girl asking for mercy not from her enemy, but from her own people. Morrison's expression softened. He looked down at Hannah, at the terror in her young face, at the marks already forming on her arm where Masaru gripped too hard. Then he looked back at Masaru and spoke with quiet steel. "Let her go. Now." Masaru's hand dropped. Not from obedience, from calculation. He was a military intelligence officer. He knew when a battle couldn't be won. He released Hana's arm and stepped back, but his face twisted with humiliation and rage. He spat words at the girl in rapid Japanese. "You are dead to honor. You are not Japanese anymore. You are nothing." Then he turned and walked away, the other commanders following him. The room remained frozen for several seconds after they left. Morrison knelt down to Hana's level, his voice gentle now. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Through her tears, Hana shook her head, but she was shaking all over, shock and relief and confusion warring in her young face. Morrison looked at Raina, who had witnessed everything. "Can you tell her she's safe? Tell her that won't happen again." Raina translated, her own voice shaking. When Hana heard the words, she cried harder, not from fear now, from something else, something she had no name for. The enemy had protected her from her own people. Her own commander had called her dead to honor. But the American, the one she'd been taught to fear since childhood, had kept her safe. That night, the barracks buzzed with whispered conversations. The women couldn't stop talking about what had happened. For the first time, they spoke openly about their doubts. He was going to hit her, her own commander. And the American stopped him. Why would they do that? Why would they care? Because maybe they do see us as human beings. But we're the enemy. Wallah, the war is almost over. We were prisoners, not soldiers anymore. Raina lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. Something had broken today. Something fundamental. The old certainties no longer held. The commanders weren't protectors. The enemy wasn't cruel. Everything she had been taught was wrong, or if not wrong, then at least incomplete. The world was more complicated than simple categories of friend and enemy, honor and shame us and them. She thought about Hannah humming an American song. Such a small thing, such a tiny rebellion, just a girl enjoying a melody. And for that she was almost beaten, declared dead to honor, cast out. But the Americans had protected her, had said she mattered, had treated her like a person whose body deserved to be safe from violence. Raina closed her eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. Too many thoughts, too many questions, too many cracks in the foundation of everything she believed. Tomorrow would bring more changes, more challenges, more impossible choices. But tonight in the darkness, 87 women lay awake and wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was another way to live. A way that didn't require choosing between honor and survival. A way that allowed for both mercy and dignity. A way forward that their mothers and grandmothers had never imagined possible. The crack was widening. Soon it would become a chasm. And on the other side waited a version of themselves they didn't yet know, but were beginning slowly to become. In the afternoons after work assignments ended, the women had free time. Some gathered in small groups to talk quietly. Others wrote letters home, though they didn't know if the letters would ever reach Japan. A few attended English classes that the camp offered, as if these women might have futures beyond captivity, as if learning was still worthwhile, even at the end of everything. Evenings brought dinner, then more free time before lights out at 9. The routine was simple, predictable, almost peaceful. And that made the guilt worse. Because while the women ate 3 meals a day and slept in beds with clean sheets, they knew what was happening back home. They knew Japan was being bombed, cities destroyed, families scattered. Food was scarce, children were starving. And here they were, prisoners of war, living better than they had lived in years. When letters began arriving from Japan in early May, delivered through the Red Cross, the words were carefully censored, but the meaning was clear. Yuki received a letter from her mother dated April 20th. We are grateful you are alive. Do not worry about us. We manage with what we have. But between the lines, Yuki could read the truth. They were not managing. They were suffering, starving, desperate. Another woman received news that her brother had died in the final months of the war. She sat on her bed holding the letter, tears falling silently. Around her, other women cried too, for their own losses, for the weight of survival while others had died. Raina's letter came on May 10th, her mother's handwriting, shaky but clear. Your uncle's house burned. We are staying with neighbors. Food is difficult, but we are strong. Come home when you can. Uncle's house burned, code for Tokyo bombing. Their family home was gone, destroyed in the firebombing raids that had turned whole neighborhoods into ash. Raina read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it under her pillow. That night she couldn't eat dinner. The guilt was too heavy. Every bite of food felt like theft from her mother's mouth. The Japanese commanders noticed the letters, noticed the women gaining weight, looking healthier, and they did not approve. One afternoon in mid-May, as the women returned from their work assignments, Masaru gathered them in the yard. American guards watched from a distance but didn't interfere. The commanders were prisoners too. They had the right to speak to their countrywomen. Masaru's voice was cold and precise as a surgeon's knife. Look at yourselves. You grow fat on enemy food while your families starve. You smile at American soldiers while our brothers lie dead in the Pacific. You have forgotten who you are. You have forgotten your duty. You have forgotten Japan. The words cut deep. The women stood frozen, heads bowed, unable to defend themselves. Because part of what he said felt true. They were eating well. They were accepting kindness from the enemy. And every moment of comfort felt like betrayal of those suffering at home. You will remember your place, Masaru continued. You will stop this fraternization with the Americans. You will maintain dignity and discipline, or I will ensure you understand the meaning of shame. After he dismissed them, the women walked to their barracks in silence. The small joy they had started to feel, the tiny happiness of being safe and fed, evaporated like water on hot stone. They were back in the familiar cage of obligation and honor. Even if the bars were invisible, they were still trapped. But Sergeant Morrison noticed the change. He supervised kitchen work and saw how quiet the women had become after the commander's speech. He saw the fear in their eyes when they passed the Japanese officers. He saw tears being quickly wiped away when they thought no one was looking. One day he approached Raina as she worked in the infirmary, organizing medical supplies. His voice gentle, concerned. Is everything all right? You seem different. Scared. Raina didn't know how to answer. How could she explain the complex web of honor, shame, duty, and fear that governed her life? How could she make him understand that her own people were more frightening than her captors? "It's nothing," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. But Morrison wasn't fooled. He had been in the military long enough to recognize fear, real fear, the kind that came from knowing punishment was coming and being unable to stop it. He made a note to talk to Captain William Hayes, the camp commander, about what he was seeing. Something was happening that needed attention. Meanwhile, Raina's internal conflict deepened with every passing day. Every morning she worked alongside Morrison in the infirmary or around the camp. He was patient, kind, decent. He showed her pictures of his family's ranch in Texas, rolling hills and cattle and wide open sky. He talked about his sister Mary, who had been a Navy nurse. He never mentioned how she died, but Raina could guess. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. The day that started this war. The day that took his sister and set him on a path that led here to a prison camp in New Mexico, protecting Japanese women from their own commanders. Every evening she sat through Masaru's lectures about honor and duty and shame, about how accepting enemy kindness was corruption, about how survival through surrender was worse than death, about how they were all dishonored and the only way to restore what was lost was through absolute obedience to the old ways, the old rules, the old certainties that war had supposedly proven false, but which he clung to with desperate intensity. She was being pulled in two directions with equal force, and she didn't know which would tear her apart first. Then came the demand that changed everything. It was late May, the 23rd to be exact. The women had been at Camp Lordsburg for 5 weeks and 2 days. Raina had just finished her afternoon shift in the infirmary when Masaru approached her privately away from the other women, away from American eyes. "Walk with me," he said, not a request, a command that could not be refused. They walked to the edge of the compound, close enough to the fence that they could speak quietly without being overheard, but far enough from the guards that no one would think anything suspicious was happening. Just a commander speaking with one of his countrywomen. Normal. Routine. Masaru's voice was low and hard as iron when he finally spoke. "You work closely with the Americans. You translate for them. You have access to their plans, their conversations, their routines. You see things that others do not see." Raina's heart began to race. She knew where this was going, knew and dreaded it with every fiber of her being. "You will report to me every week what the Americans discuss, what they plan, their guard schedules, their routines, any weaknesses you observe, any opportunities." He paused. "You are not a traitor. You are protecting our women from corruption. You are serving your country and your emperor. This is your duty." Every cell in Raina's body screamed. This was wrong. Morrison trusted her. He had been nothing but kind. He had protected them, protected Hana, shown them mercy when he had every reason to show cruelty. His sister had died because of Japanese bombs. He should hate them. But instead he treated them like human beings. And now she was being ordered to betray him. But Masaru was her superior officer. He was Japanese. He was male. He was authority incarnate. And Raina had been trained her entire life, all 24 years of it, to obey authority without question, without hesitation, without allowing personal feelings to interfere with duty. "Hi," she heard herself say. Yes, the word left her mouth automatically. A reflex born of 2.5 decades of conditioning. Obedience without thought. Compliance without consideration. But even as the word hung in the air between them, something inside her screamed in protest. "What have I just agreed to? What have I become?" Masaru nodded, satisfied. "Good. You will report to me on Sundays after dinner. Behind the supply building where we will not be disturbed. Do not fail in this duty. The consequences of failure would be severe." He didn't elaborate on what those consequences might be. He didn't need to. They both understood. Punishment, shame, being made an example. Or worse. He walked away, leaving Raina standing by the fence alone. She had just agreed to spy on the man who had shown her nothing but mercy. The man whose sister had died because of her country. The man who could have been cruel but chose kindness instead. And she had said yes. She had obeyed. She had become exactly what she despised. A traitor, a spy, A woman who repaid kindness with betrayal. The next few days were torture of a kind Reina had never experienced before. Physical pain she understood, hunger she understood, fear she understood, but this guilt, this self-loathing, this constant war between duty and conscience was something new and horrible. She observed Morrison as she worked, taking mental notes against her will, his daily routines, when he did rounds, which guards he trusted most, how the work assignments were organized, weaknesses in camp security that a trained eye could spot. All the while, Morrison continued to be kind, continued to be patient, continued to treat her like a person whose opinions mattered and whose comfort was important. One morning, he brought her old magazines from Texas so she could practice reading English. He pointed out interesting articles, helped her with words she didn't know, smiled when she got something right. One afternoon, he helped her translate complex medical terms she encountered in the infirmary. He explained American medical practices, answered her questions, treated her like a colleague rather than a prisoner. He talked about his hopes for after the war, returning to the ranch, raising cattle, maybe getting married someday and having a family, building a life that had nothing to do with war or death or violence, just quiet days and honest work and people he loved. And all the while, Reina was cataloging how to betray him, where his vulnerabilities were, what information would be most useful to Masaru, how to repay kindness with treachery. Saturday night came, May 26th. The night before the first report was due. Reina sat on her bed after lights out, unable to sleep. She had 3 pages of notes hidden under her mattress. Guard schedules, Morrison's daily habits, observations about camp security, everything Masaru had demanded and more. She pulled the papers out and stared at them by the faint light from the guard tower outside. Every word felt like poison, every sentence a betrayal, every observation a knife in the back of a man who had done nothing but try to help. Yuki lay in the next bed, not asleep either. She had noticed Reina's distress, the way she had been increasingly withdrawn and troubled all week. "Reina," she whispered, "what's wrong?" Reina couldn't keep the secret anymore. The weight was crushing her. She told Yuki everything in hushed tones. Masaru's demand, the impossible position she was in, the notes she had taken, the report due tomorrow. Yuki listened in silence until Reina finished. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "So what will you do?" Reina looked down at the notes in her hands. 3 pages of careful observation. 3 pages of betrayal typed out in neat handwriting. She thought about Morrison showing her pictures of his sister, thought about the way he had protected Hannah, thought about how he asked if things were all right instead of demanding obedience, thought about the kindness in his eyes when he looked at them, these women who belonged to the country that had killed his sister. She thought about what Masaru had said, "You are not a traitor." But what if she was? What if the real betrayal wasn't disobeying orders, but hurting someone who had shown you nothing but mercy? What if honor wasn't about following commands, but about doing what was right even when it was hard? What if everything she had been taught was wrong? Reina pulled out a match. Her hands shook as she struck it against the box. The flame flared small and bright in the darkness. She held it to the corner of the first page. The paper caught fire, curling, blackening, turning to ash. She watched 3 weeks of careful observation burn, watched her obedience transform into smoke, watched duty become nothing but dust. When all 3 pages were consumed, she crushed the ashes under her shoe until nothing remained but black smudges that could have been anything. "Tomorrow I will face Masaru's anger," she whispered to Yuki. "And then what? And then I will face it. Because for the first time in my life, I have chosen my conscience over my orders. I have chosen what is right over what is required. And whatever happens, I can live with that choice." Yuki reached across the gap between their beds and squeezed Reina's hand. "You are braver than you know." "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right despite the fear. You just burned your orders. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen. Sunday morning came with desert heat and cloudless sky. After breakfast, Masaru was waiting at their usual spot behind the supply building. His eyes were cold and expectant. "Your report." Reina's mouth went dry. Her heart hammered, but her voice when she spoke was steady. "I have nothing to report." "Nothing?" The word was sharp as broken glass. "The Americans are careful. They do not discuss security matters in front of prisoners. I observed nothing of strategic value. It was a weak lie, they both knew it, but it was the lie she had chosen. Masaru stepped closer. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the menace in it was unmistakable. You are choosing them over us. You are choosing the enemy over your own people. No, I am choosing not to betray someone who has shown me kindness. There is a difference. There is no difference. Kindness from the enemy is a weapon, and you have fallen for it. You are weak, corrupted, shamed. Perhaps, or perhaps I am finally learning what real honor means. Masaru's face flushed red. For a moment, Reina thought he might strike her right there, but he controlled himself with visible effort. You will try harder, he said through clenched teeth. You will observe more carefully. You will bring me a proper report next week, or you will learn what it means to disappoint me. Do you understand? I understand. But they both knew what she meant. She understood the threat. She just didn't care anymore. Some things were more important than obedience. Some choices mattered more than avoiding punishment. Masaru stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. Reina stood alone behind the supply building, her whole body shaking now that he was gone. She had justified a direct order from a superior officer. She had chosen conscience over duty. She had burned her bridges, and there was no going back. Whatever happened next, she had made her choice, and she would face the consequences. That afternoon, everything changed again. A military vehicle arrived at the camp gates. Not a supply truck, a staff car, official, important, bearing the markings of the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. Two officers in crisp uniforms stepped out, military lawyers, investigators, the kind of men who asked difficult questions and expected truthful answers. Captain Hayes met them at the command building. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Morrison was called in after 30 minutes. He emerged 90 minutes later, his face tight with controlled anger and barely concealed worry. Reina saw him crossing the yard and fell into step beside him, drawn by the tension she could see in every line of his body. Sergeant Morrison, what happened? Is something wrong? He glanced at her, seemed to debate whether to tell her, then apparently decided she deserved to know. Army's investigating complaints. Someone reported that Camp Lordsburg guards are being too friendly with prisoners. Fraternization concerns. Possible violations of conduct regulations. Reina's heart sank. What does that mean? Means if they find evidence to support the claims, I could face court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Prison time, maybe. He paused, looked at her directly. And you ladies could be transferred to a different facility, a harsher one where the guards aren't so friendly. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Everything they had built here, the fragile safety, the small kindnesses, the possibility of something better than mere survival, could all disappear. The women could be sent somewhere worse, somewhere cruel, somewhere that matched the propaganda's promises of how prisoners would be treated. And Morrison could lose everything: his career, his freedom, his future, and all for the crime of treating enemy prisoners like human beings. I am sorry, Reina said quietly, guilt washing over her. This is because of us. Morrison shook his head firmly. Nothing to be sorry for. I knew the risks when I volunteered for this assignment. I made my choice with open eyes. He paused, then continued. But Reina, I need you to understand something. Those investigators, they're going to interview prisoners. They'll ask questions about how they've been treated, whether guards have been inappropriate in any way, whether there's been any fraternization. Reina understood immediately what he wasn't saying. Masaru had leverage now, real leverage. He could destroy Morrison with a few well-placed accusations: inappropriate conduct, fraternization, favoritism, and Morrison couldn't defend himself without making things worse, without seeming like he was covering up the very things he was accused of. Ishikawa will use this, Reina said. He will lie to the investigators. He will say whatever he needs to say to get you punished. Yeah, he will. And there's not much I can do about it except tell the truth and hope they believe me over him. They walked in silence for a moment, both understanding how precarious the situation had become. Then Morrison stopped and turned to face her fully. Reina, I want to tell you something. About why I do this, why I treat you all the way I do, why I volunteered for this assignment when most men wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. He pulled out his wallet, removed a small photograph that had clearly been looked at many times, the edges worn soft from handling. The same picture he had shown her before. Mary in her Navy nurse uniform, young and smiling, and full of life that would be cut short. She was 22 years old, posted at Pearl Harbor as a Navy nurse. December 7th, 1941. 7 in the morning, she was starting her shift at the hospital when the bombs started falling. His voice remained steady, but Raina could hear the grief beneath it, old and deep and never fully healed. She stayed at her post, kept working even when the building was on fire, even when bombs were still falling. She saved 17 men before the roof collapsed. They gave her a medal posthumously, said she was a hero, but all I could think was that she was my baby sister and she was gone, and I would never see her again. Raina felt tears burning her eyes. She had known his sister died at Pearl Harbor, but hearing the details, hearing the pain in his voice, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I enlisted 6 months later, Morrison continued. Wanted revenge, wanted to kill every Japanese soldier I could find. Spent 3 years in the Pacific doing exactly that. I was good at it too. Became a sniper. Killed a lot of men. Told myself each one was justice for Mary. He looked away across the desert toward mountains in the distance. Then in April on Okinawa, I found a field hospital that had been hit in the crossfire. Japanese civilian hospital. I went in to clear it, make sure there were no combatants hiding there. His jaw tightened. There was a nurse, Japanese, maybe 23, 24 years old. Her uniform was soaked with blood, but she wasn't wounded. It was her patient's blood. She was trying to move a wounded man to safety, trying to save him, even though the building was falling apart around them. He paused. She looked up at me, saw my rifle, saw my uniform, and I saw her eyes, with terror, absolute terror. She thought I was going to kill her. And you know what part of me wanted to? Part of me saw the enemy and nothing else. What did you do? Raina asked quietly. I helped her move the patient. Then I secured the hospital and called for medics. But she died anyway. Internal injuries from the blast. She died in my arms about an hour later. Morrison put the photograph back in his wallet carefully as if it were something precious and fragile. That's when I realized she was just like Mary. Same age, same uniform, same dedication to saving lives. Just trying to help people. Just doing her job. And I had spent 3 years hating people exactly like her, killing people exactly like her because I couldn't save Mary. He looked at Raina directly. So when they asked for volunteers to work with Japanese prisoners to help run camps like this one, I raised my hand. Because I can't save Mary. She's gone and she's never coming back. But maybe I can save someone else's sister. Someone else's daughter. Maybe I can honor her memory by being the kind of person she would have wanted me to be. Raina felt tears streaming down her face now. Your sister would be very proud of you. Maybe, or maybe she'd say I should have figured this out sooner. Should have realized that hate doesn't honor the dead, it just creates more death. He managed a small, sad smile. Either way, I'm not going to let Ishikawa or Army investigators or anyone else stop me from doing what's right, even if it costs me everything. Raina made a decision in that moment. Morrison had trusted her with his deepest truth, his greatest pain, his most vulnerable moment. She would trust him with hers. Sergeant Morrison, there is something you need to know, something I should have told you before. She took a deep breath. Ishikawa ordered me to spy on you, to report your movements, your routines, any weaknesses I observed. He wanted me to gather information that could be used against you. Morrison's expression didn't change. He didn't look surprised or betrayed or angry. He just looked at her with those steady blue eyes and waited. I refused him. Raina continued quickly. I took notes for a week because I was afraid, because I have been trained my whole life to obey orders without question. But last night I burned them. I destroyed the report rather than betray you, because you have shown me nothing but kindness, and I will not repay that with treachery. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that shocked her. I know. Raina blinked. You know, how could you know? Figured it out after the first week. You're the only prisoner with enough English to be useful as a spy. You're positioned perfectly, working in the infirmary, translating, seeing everything that happens. Of course he would try to use you. It's what I would do in his position. If you knew, why did you not say anything? Why did you not have me removed from those positions? Because I was waiting to see what you would choose, and you chose right. His voice was gentle. You think I didn't notice how terrified you've been every Sunday? You think I couldn't see the relief on your face this morning when he walked away without hurting you? Raina felt exposed, vulnerable, seen in a way she had never been seen before. But now we have a problem, Morrison continued. A bigger problem than just the investigation. If Ishikawa suspects you disobeyed him, you're in danger. Real danger. And if he's planning something larger, something beyond just trying to get me court-martialed, we need to know what it is. What are you saying? I'm saying I need your help, not as a prisoner following orders, not as someone who has no choice, but as someone making a free decision. Work with me. Help me find out what Ishikawa is really planning. Help me protect all of you. He looked straight into her eyes. But only if you want to. Only if you choose this freely. I won't order you. I won't manipulate you. I'm asking, and you can say no. You have that right. For the first time in her entire life, a man was offering Raina a genuine choice. Not an order disguised as a question. Not a demand wrapped in politeness. Not a situation where refusal would bring punishment. A real, true, honest choice. The freedom to say yes or no and be respected either way. Yes, she said, her voice was strong. I will help you, not because I must, but because I choose to. Morrison nodded. Then we start now. Over the next week, Morrison and Captain Hayes began quietly intercepting Masaru's outgoing mail. It wasn't difficult. All prisoner mail went through camp censors anyway. They just paid special attention to the letters from the Japanese officers. 3 letters in 1 week caught their attention. Each was written in Japanese, which was normal. But each also contained unusual phrasing, odd word choices, sentences that didn't quite make sense in context. Code. Simple substitution code, the kind taught in basic military intelligence training. Nothing sophisticated, nothing that would take long to crack if you knew what you were looking for. Morrison brought the letters to Raina and Yuki on the evening of May 30th. Can you help us decode these? Yuki had worked as a clerk in a Tokyo government office before the war. She had training in codes and ciphers, basic stuff, but enough to recognize what she was looking at. This is military code, she said after examining the first letter. Simple substitution. Give me some time and I can break it. It took 3 evenings of work. Raina and Yuki huddled together after lights out, working by the faint glow from the guard tower outside, whispering over pages of notes and attempts in gradual progress. When they finally cracked it on the night of June 1st, the message made Raina's blood run cold. Honor restoration plan ready. Requires supplies. June 15th deadline. All have agreed. For the Emperor. Death before dishonor. Yuki stared at the decoded text, her face pale even in the dim light. What does honor restoration mean? But Raina knew. She had heard the term before in military briefings, in propaganda broadcasts, in whispered conversations among officers who thought translators weren't really listening. Mass suicide, she whispered. He is planning mass suicide for all of us. Yuki's hand started shaking. For all 87 of us. Yes, to cleanse the dishonor of surrender. To prove that Japanese women would rather die than accept enemy mercy. To restore honor through death. But we don't want to die, Yuki said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and dropped back to a whisper. We want to live. We want to go home. We want to see our families again. He doesn't care what we want. He cares about what he thinks honor demands, what tradition requires, what the Emperor would expect. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had discovered pressing down on them. We have to tell Morrison, Yuki finally said. Yes, but this needs proof, real proof that will convince the investigators. Otherwise, it's just our word against his, and we're prisoners. Enemy prisoners, who will believe us over a Japanese officer. The next morning, Raina took the decoded letters to Morrison. He was in the command building with Captain Hayes when she knocked. They ushered her in quickly, sensing from her expression that this was urgent. Morrison read the decoded message 3 times, his face growing darker with each reading. June 15th, he said. That's 2 weeks from today. How does he plan to do it? How do you kill 87 people in a prison camp without anyone noticing until it's too late? Hayes was already thinking strategically. Poison is most likely, something he could put in food or water, something that would act quickly enough that we couldn't intervene once it started. We need to search his quarters, Morrison said. Find whatever he's planning to use. Get real evidence. If we search openly, he'll know we're onto him. He might accelerate his timeline, Hayes countered. We need to be smart about this. They all looked at Raina. I could search, she said quietly. The women clean the officers' quarters once a week. I could volunteer for that duty. Look around when I have the chance. Morrison shook his head immediately. Too dangerous. If he catches you. If we do nothing, 87 women die in 2 weeks, Raina interrupted. I will take the risk. It took 3 days to arrange. 3 days during which Raina worked and ate and slept and tried to act normal while knowing what was coming. On June 4th, she and Yuki were assigned to clean the officers' quarters while the men were in a mandatory meeting with camp administrators. They had maybe 90 minutes, maybe less. Masaru's room was sparse and neat, military precision in every detail. Bed made perfectly, clothes folded exactly. Everything in its assigned place, which made the hiding places predictable. Yuki found it after 15 minutes of careful searching. Under a loose floorboard beneath the bed, a small package wrapped in cloth hidden where it wouldn't be found by casual inspection, but where Masaru could access it quickly if needed. Reina unwrapped it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Glass capsules, dozens of them, each about the size of a large vitamin pill, each filled with white crystalline powder. She had seen these before, in Manila, in military headquarters, cyanide capsules, standard issue for Japanese officers who might be captured. Suicide pills meant to provide a quick, supposedly painless death rather than enduring the dishonor of interrogation. But there were too many, far too many for one person's suicide. She counted them quickly. 92 capsules, more than enough. Enough for 87 people with a few to spare. Yuki stood watch by the door, her face white as bone. He really means to do it. Yes. Reina rewrapped the package exactly as they had found it, replaced the floorboard, made sure everything looked undisturbed. He really means to kill all of us. They reported back to Morrison and Hayes within the hour. Hayes listened to their description, asked detailed questions, then sat back in his chair with his eyes closed. This is a problem, he finally said. A serious problem. How is this a problem? Morrison demanded. We know what he's planning. We know how. We arrest him right now and what? Hayes interrupted. We search his quarters based on the word of 2 enemy prisoners. He claims we planted the evidence. He claims this is retaliation for his complaints to the investigators. And the investigators, who are already looking at you for fraternization, will have a field day. Morrison's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He knew Hayes was right. So what do we do? He asked instead. Hayes opened his eyes. We catch him in the act. We wait until he makes his move, until he actually tries to use those capsules, and then we stop him. With witnesses, with evidence that can't be disputed. We catch him red-handed. That's a hell of a risk, Morrison said. What if we're too late? What if he moves faster than we expect? Then we have a tragedy on our hands. But if we move too soon, we lose any chance of proving what he's doing. The investigators will assume we're manufacturing evidence to save your career. Hayes looked at both of them. I don't like it either, but it's the only play we have. The plan was set. They would watch Masaru constantly, put additional guards on subtle rotation, monitor the kitchen and water supplies, and wait for him to make his move. But they couldn't tell the women. If 87 people suddenly knew their commander planned to kill them, the panic would be impossible to hide. Masaru would know his plan was compromised. He might accelerate, or change tactics, or do something desperate and unpredictable. So they would wait, and watch, and hope they could move fast enough when the moment came. The next 10 days were the longest of Reina's life. Every meal felt like potential death. Every glass of water might be poison. Every moment Masaru was out of sight sent her heart racing with fear that this was it, this was when he would act. She tried to act normal, tried to work and eat and sleep and not let the terror show. But it was impossible. Yuki saw it. Some of the other women noticed. They asked if something was wrong. Nothing, Reina would say. Just worried about my family back home. It wasn't a complete lie. She was worried about her family, but the immediate terror was much closer. On June 13th, 2 days before the deadline in the decoded letter, Masaru approached Reina after dinner. "Walk with me." Her blood went cold, but she had no choice. Refusing would be suspicious. They went to their usual spot, private, isolated. Masaru stood with his back to her for a long moment, looking out at the desert that stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "You have been lying to me." Reina's heart stopped. "I don't understand." "You have not been gathering information. You have not been observing. You have been avoiding me, refusing your duty, choosing the enemy over your own people." "I have tried, but the Americans are careful. They always—" The word cut through the air like a knife. Masaru turned to face her. His expression was cold and empty. The face of a man who had made terrible decisions and was at peace with them. "I know what you did. I know you and that clerk searched my quarters. I know you found the capsules. I know you told the Americans." Panic flooded through Reina's entire body. He knew. He had known all along. Had he set a trap? Had he wanted them to find the capsules? Was there some deeper plan she couldn't see? "Did you tell them?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. There was no point in lying now. "Yes," Masaru nodded slowly as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "I thought so. You are a traitor. The worst kind, not forced, not coerced. You chose betrayal freely." "I chose life, for all of us. Life without honor is not life. It is merely existence, breathing while dead inside." His voice was utterly conviction-filled. "I had planned to offer a choice, to allow those who wished to die with honor to take the capsules voluntarily. But you have made that impossible. So now I must act differently." Reina felt ice in her veins. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you tell anyone about this conversation, I will kill the youngest first. Little Hannah, 19 years old, so full of foolish hope. I will strangle her in her sleep tonight. Quietly, carefully, then tomorrow night the next youngest, then the next, one each night until the Americans realize they cannot protect you all, until they understand that I will have my way one way or another." The threat was delivered calmly, rationally, as if he were discussing the weather or explaining a tactical decision. The complete absence of emotion made it more terrifying than any amount of rage could have. "Or," he continued, "you can remain silent. You can keep your mouth shut. And in 2 days on June 15th, as planned, I will complete my original plan. But I will make it look voluntary. I will make it look like the women chose death because they could not live with the shame of survival. The Americans will be blamed for driving us to it. My honor will be preserved, and you will go to your death knowing you failed to save anyone." He stepped closer. "Your choice. Save one girl and watch 87 die slowly over 3 weeks. Or save yourself the immediate punishment and let 87 die quickly in 2 days. Either way you lose. Either way, honor is restored." He walked away, leaving Reina trembling. She stood frozen for a long time after he left. Her mind raced through impossible options. Every path led to death. Hannah tonight if she told. Everyone in 2 days if she didn't. There was no third choice. No way to save everyone. Or was there? She thought about Morrison, about Hayes, about the guards who had been watching Masaru, about the fact that they knew his plan, knew his timeline, knew about the capsules. She thought about what Morrison had said. "I won't let anyone stop me from doing what's right, even if it costs me everything." She thought about the choice he had given her. Real choice. Free choice. The kind of choice Masaru had never offered in his entire life. She made her decision. She went straight to Morrison's office and told him everything. Every word of Masaru's threat. Every detail of the ultimatum. The timeline. The plan to make it look voluntary. All of it. Morrison listened without interrupting. When she finished, his face was grim, but his voice was steady. "We post guards on all the women tonight. 24-hour rotation. He won't be able to get to Hannah or anyone else without being seen. And tomorrow we end this." "How?" Reina asked. "We catch him trying to use those capsules. We wait for him to make his move, and we stop him. With witnesses. With proof. We end this once and for all." Captain Hayes entered the office, having been summoned by a runner. Morrison filled him in quickly. It's risky, Hayes said when Morrison finished, but it's our best shot, maybe our only shot. He looked at Raina. You did the right thing telling us. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you did the right thing. That night, American guards were posted throughout the women's barracks, visible, armed. A clear message that no one would be harmed on their watch. Masaru noticed, of course, but he didn't react, didn't protest, didn't do anything, which somehow made it worse. The women sensed something was wrong. The tension was palpable. They whispered among themselves, asked questions that couldn't be answered. Raina lay in bed, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and waiting for tomorrow, June 14th, the day before Masaru's deadline, the day everything would either end in salvation or tragedy. She thought about her mother in Tokyo, about whether she would ever see her again, about whether the last letter she had written would reach home or just disappear into the chaos of a collapsing empire. She thought about Yuki, about Sachiko, about young Hana, who had almost been beaten for humming an American song, about all 86 other women sleeping fitfully around her, not knowing how close they had come to death, how close they still were. She thought about Morrison and the nurse who had died in his arms on Okinawa, about choices made and prices paid, about mercy extended across lines of enmity, about what it meant to choose right over easy, and she thought about tomorrow. Whatever came, she had made her choice. She had chosen truth over obedience, life over honor, mercy over tradition. Now she would see if those choices mattered, if one woman's courage could stand against centuries of rigid doctrine, if kindness was really stronger than hate. Tomorrow would bring the answer. Outside, the desert night was cold and clear, and full of stars that had witnessed 10,000 years of human struggle and would witness 10,000 more. Somewhere in that vast darkness, the future waited. And Raina, for the first time in her life, had chosen what that future would be, not through obedience, but through courage.